All right, good evening, everyone. First of all, I want to thank you all for coming out tonight. I know it's not the easiest thing in the world. I do appreciate it, and we'll try and get you home as early as we possibly can tonight, so you can go home with more shoveling. But, in any event, where we are tonight, just especially for the audience, where we are tonight is we did have a public hearing on the public information meeting, on the 24th of September. We had a subsequent meeting after that. We received input from various individuals, some of whom are here this evening, some aren't, indicating that they would like to see a change in zoning on their property, and there might be an upgrade to zoning. We're going to talk a little bit about those sites tonight and a couple of others probably. And after we get done doing that, we're going to look at our next steps, and I think we'll hold off on that until we get some committee input. With that, I'd like to get into the listing of the properties that we started out with. In terms, and the other point is the committee did also do site tours prior to the 24th of the properties in question, so had some background knowledge of what you were looking at, what you requested. So we'll go through those and talk a little bit about what the committee's thoughts are on the properties, and if they'd like to change them or recommend a change to the town board or leave them as they are. Your timing is impeccable.
It's like the second time I've heard that.
We've just done an introduction, so we're all set. I'm going to start with, why don't we start with, yeah, we'll start with the blue sheet first.
Audience members, if they're not.
We're going to jump up to Bay Road, 1177 and 1179. This is Paul Christopher's property, and Paul Christopher has two properties that are kind of unique in that on the south side of the properties at 1177, 1179. There we are. The property to the south is unlimited business. There's currently a hair salon there. There's a plaza next to the hair salon. He owns a structure, which is a multi-residential structure. It's a pre-existing non-conforming. I believe it's a two-family structure on that site. There's also a large barn on the property from days gone by. He also owns a vacant parcel next to it to the north. These properties are all zoned R-1-20. They're single-family residential properties. He is looking for some type of relief to allow possibly a multi-residential zoning on the property so that he could build like another two-plex or a four-plex building. In fact, there's a transition between the single-family home to the north at 1175 and the the commercial use to the south and the hair salon. I know the committee went out and saw that. Any thoughts? I think he would have to tear down, if he were to do anything, he would have to tear down the existing barn to give himself more room, and he would have to re-subdivide the properties into one parcel. Again, we're not talking about, at least he's not talking about a large development. He's looking at possibly another building to complement the one he has there now, possibly in the back. He is sensitive to the neighbors to the north. There is a hedgerow of trees to the along the property line in the north. He would like to build the building probably to the south, closer to the commercial area than the residential.
Has there been any feedback from the owner of 1175?
No, we have not had any, and that's the other thing, we've not had feedback from anybody yet. Again, if you make a recommendation, we're gonna have to go out and talk to them about potential for the recommendation. From the time you make a recommendation to keep it as it is or to change it, from the time that we actually put it into a final document form, we would have to go out and talk to these people and see if that's realistic. I'm assuming that if they didn't want to change their zoning or want to change, we'd have to bring that back to you and rediscover what might need to be done in order to accommodate everybody.
I'm sorry, just to be clear, the existing property, looking to leave that as is or tear that down and build?
No, he told us that he would look to keep it as it is and then possibly build something similar in nature, like a two-family to the back where those the trailers and then the barn. And then he would maintain that buffer along the property line.
It looked like a kind of a long, sort of skinny property, you know, smaller frontage on Bay Road.
Right.
So the property to the west, is there a buffer, you know, a good buffer of, say, evergreen trees or a berm or something?
There's not much of a buffer to the west. The buffer really is along the northerly property line. Somebody that's smart and actually buffered themselves. I don't know if it's his buffer or if it's the neighbors to the north, but there is a good solid hedgerow to the north of the property. I don't know if there's that much here. You can see maybe a tree or two in the back. Any type of development would require additional buffering. I mean,
Right,
we
that's
would-
what I was gonna
yeah,
ask.
We would do that in any case.
You also have to keep in mind if we're changing to MR or TH or whatever it is, it's gonna be MR forever, so whether Mr. Christopher owns it or not, or what his intentions are, I don't know if I'd say put too much credence into what their thoughts are. Obviously, once you rezone a property, anybody could buy it, level the house, put up something else. You gotta keep in mind, you know, what could happen, not just, you know, what kind of the immediate plan is for it, but as Jim said, you know, there are required buffers between an MR and a single-family residential, you know,
How wide
district.
is 1177 again?
That's what are the dimensions of that property?
And one of the things we always have to take into consideration, it's easy to,
66 feet.
And what would be the required alternative change of zone?
that's where I'm going. So anytime you have a rezoning on properties that are existing like this, where there's an infill type situation, it ends up, we have done this on several occasions, particularly along this Route 441 across from Wegmans. You had some single-family homes that were R120, 100 by 200 foot lots. They fed a 1,400 square foot building with no problem for residential. But when you tear those buildings down and now you've created a parking lot out back and you need a different buffer requirement, we generally end up having to go to the zoning board for variances because in essence, we are creating the hardship for the property owners, whoever they may be. So in this case, you would need to have an 80-foot setback buffer around the perimeter of the property in order to meet the requirement for the residential to the north and to the west. It would not be applicable to the south because you've got a commercial property abutting it. So immediately I'm starting to believe that you would probably need, you know, you'd need to have variance to accommodate that setback requirement, that buffer requirement.
1177 should be the buffer area.
Could you
How much-
combine?
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Could you combine them into just, now they're one parcel?
They would have to,
Yeah.
yes.
Oh,
That would be a condition of having to do
Got
that. They could never do this without combining it.
And how much parking would be required?
Well,
Depends on the
if it's
use and size.
residential, it's two spaces per unit.
Right.
So if they have two there now and they want to have two more, you know, you have to get to 4 per
It
unit.
would require one covered space, one
Right.
So
uncovered
they would,
space. You'd have to have
you're
a
talking,
sort of
Jim,
garage
of
or.
a multifamily use like, or two-family?
That's what he's indicated to us that he'd be interested in doing. He initially came to us with the idea of going to a commercial use. And I was hesitant to do that because now you have a domino effect starting down Bay Road, and I don't think that we want to do that. The neighborhoods are still very viable along Bay Road. This is just kind of a weird situation because he does abut commercial to one end. And I can see why the town back in 1980 did not continue it northward, because obviously now you're into the Leedale neighborhood, which I'm sure they did not want to do at that time.
You mentioned he would have it, 2 families. Would he be limited to 2 if he rezoned it? Or
Generally
could he-
speaking, what happens is when the town board hears an application for rezoning, which doesn't happen very often, but when they do that, you have to prepare a plan to identify what it is they're looking for a rezoning. So if somebody comes in with 100 units for that site, they're not gonna get a rezoning. If they come in with 2 units, they might get a rezoning, depending on the situation.
Would he be locked in? If he
Yes.
proposed 2 and then gets approved, rezoned as MR and said, well, I'm gonna do 4 because I can
No,
fit
the
it.
rezonings are conditional,
Okay.
and you don't get it unless you come in. I mean, you're pretty much going for site plan approval before you get your rezoning, just to see if everything works properly. So, no, that's generally not the case. They have to demonstrate what it is they're going to be building in order to get that. And they have to put buffers in, and they have to have adequate parking, and they have to have adequate green space if possible, so. There's a lot that goes into it. And as I say though, because of what we do on these rezonings, you're basically rezoning smaller lots now to other uses. They generally do end up needing variances. And we generally do grant them because we put them in a position where they can't use the property unless they get a variance. So that's the first one we've looked at. So keep that in mind as we go forward.
Any initial thoughts from the group, feedback, comments, concerns?
Yeah, sort of like, that there's no formal plan or application before the town at this point for that one.
There isn't for any of them.
Correct.
No, they
I just want to
requested, so-
reiterate that.
Yeah, so it would just be, you know, if you were supportive of it, it could be a the committee coming out of this saying, you know, given the right circumstances, whatever, obviously the town board ultimately decide, and obviously, you know, they'd be conditioned upon it, but they can say, you know, this committee, given the right circumstances, would support an MR development on these two properties here, would kind of be your recommendation, and then obviously the town board would think yay or nay, or hear any proposal before it to say, yeah, he wants to add 2 units, or he wants to add 20 units, and then see where it goes. So just kind of looking for, you know, is this group supportive of it? Obviously, we don't have a plan, we don't know what it could be, what it is gonna be, but just whether you think, you know, it would even be possible or made sense to do that.
Question, so let's say this owner, 5 years from now sells the property.
Mm-hmm.
Mark, you kind of said something like, well, once somebody kind of gets rid of it, you don't know what the next owner's gonna do with it. But presumably, if the next owner wanted to use it for something other than 2 housing units, they would have to come back before the zoning board.
Well,
Or does MR give them
they
leeway
would
to do
have to
something else?
use it for whatever the zoning allows for. If they don't do that, then they'd have to go into something called a use variance.
Right.
Use variances are almost impossible to get, because you have to demonstrate that the property in question cannot yield you a reasonable return based on its current use and zoning. So if you have, for instance, right now, if you were to come in and ask for a 2-family dwelling on 1177, he couldn't do that because it's single-family residential. He could go to the zoning board of appeals, everybody has the right to do that, and ask for a use variance, but the problem is, he could theoretically build a single-family residence on that site right now and still get a return. The return would be what he's paid for the property and what he's put in for the taxes on it. So, the question is, does it really lend itself to a single-family residence on Bay Road now versus what it did back in the 1950s or 60s? You kind of have to weigh that out and determine whether or not it's rational. And the one thing he has going in his favor is the fact that he does about commercial property. It's not like he's sitting out in the middle of a single-family residential zone. That's his rationale for it. And he has general business, you can see in the corner and down at the bottom there. He has general business, which is Flaherty's, I believe, across this, kitty corner from his house. So it's not like it's farmland that's sitting out there that, it's changed.
What about a mixed use? Commercial business down.
Well, I think the intent was trying to not have business. I mean, he initially came to us with the idea of possibly putting
With an
business.
apartment upstairs.
Well, the problem still is you still have a single-family residence at 1175. And if you start putting commercial further up north, you may have him coming in a couple of years saying, hey, now you got commercial next to me, you guys did it. I want commercial now too. It's hard pressed to.
It's always hard to find where the end of that transition is, or where do you
Yeah, and
start and
I
stop?
think the town used Terrell Drive. You can see as it goes across Terrell, they use that as the boundary line to maintain residential to the north.
I think it's completely logical, and it transitions nicely from what's there to what's above it.
And certainly, when you make these recommendations, we're also gonna put caveats in there that they have to do this, they have to do that, to give the town board some directions to what you were thinking in terms of making sure there's adequate buffering, there's adequate transition. We're not just, we're just not sticking something out there just for the sake of doing it.
We drove past this, did we not talk about this all going basically commercial? Or potentially?
Not this one. We did drive past this and looked at, I think you're thinking further to the south on Plank Road.
Maybe.
We talked about that one. We'll talk about that one.
It's fine.
Are we ready to take a vote on this one? I don't want to pressure anybody into it, but if everybody hands up if you're in favor of supporting rezoning to MR
With conditions,
with
obviously.
conditions.
With conditions, yeah.
All right,
So majority rules on that one.
all right.
So,
And we will, when we write this, you'll obviously be looking at the wording.
yeah, this is your last chance. I mean, obviously.
You're gonna be
if you
looking at
start
the
writing
wording
document,
as to
it'll
how
come
this
back
goes to the
and
town
we'll
board
show
as
how
a,
it
as a recommendation.
carries forward, but at least to kind of give us something to get started and. Okay.
The next one is further down the street on Empire Boulevard at 1423. We also looked at this site. This is the property that has the zoning district splitting through it in half. You can see the yellowish green is LaSalle's Landing zoning. The property in question is right here next to the white panel at 1423. The southerly portion of it, the southerly and easterly portion of it is still zoned R120. Could you put the contours in on that one, Doug? Thank you. So you can see with the contours, the thicker lines are 10-foot intervals. So if you're looking at the properties over on Morning Woods Lane and also Mance Lane to the east, they are quite a bit higher than, if you look at the cul-de-sac here on Morning Woods, that's 410 feet above sea level. The next one over here, I'm trying to find it, is 400. So you've dropped 10 feet from the back of the yards down into the property in question. It does get tight, so you can see right where Doug's got the cursor, there are little plateau areas that you could get into. Again, you've got residential to the east, you've got commercial. At one time it was industrial commercial, it's now, that property is vacant right now, and I don't know what's gonna go into it. It was called the Severi Contractors, they used to do a lot of concrete work. And that's the thing to remember about Empire Boulevard. The first 500 feet in up until 1980, 81 was zoned just general commercial. General commercial encompassed everything. That's why you have all these pre-existing non-conforming industrial uses down there. So in this case, he's got residential to the east, he's got commercial to the west. There are some constraints with the property in terms of topography and how much area, usable area he's got to play with. Our thought was, he initially was looking to do all of LaSalle's Landing. That's probably not a great idea if you're going to abut it up next to the residences on Morning Woods and Mance Lane. He then thought if we were going to do that, then he would go to like a townhouse dwelling type unit on that property. If we were to go to LaSalle's Landing. We could also look at possibly even, we could rezone it with the caveat that it does get developed as townhouse development, as a transition buffer. Or you could look at it as townhouse development and put the entire property into townhouse development and take it out of LaSalle's Landing. It is tight. There are some constraints there. Townhouse development is probably the best use for the property in terms of being able to cluster units into certain little areas so that you're not creating a lot of problems topographically. You would have to work out the details with the state DOT to get access to the road from Empire Boulevard into the site.
How many units is he looking to put in there?
I'm not sure he even knows at this point in time. You'd have to have an engineering firm come in and identify for us what could be developed and what can't. Obviously, as I say, we don't allow you to build on steep slopes. We don't allow you to disrupt slopes that are going to cause, sloughing and sedimentation issues downstream. So they would have to look at the areas as to how they could actually feasibly develop those sites while minimizing impact to the grades.
Jim, in terms of visibility from the homes on Mance and Morning Woods, height restrictions, are there height restrictions that would have to be
They could go,
enforced?
that's a good question, they could go 2 stories. If they were to go to townhouse dwelling, they can't go higher than that. If they were to go to LaSalle's Landing, they could go higher.
Yeah.
I don't know what that gets you to go more than 2 stories on a townhouse, but they could theoretically do it. But I think his intent is to try and minimize impact to the neighbors. I think he would like to you know, as I say, cluster things and keep them to a point where they're not impacting the views of the neighbors in that area. That's
So
good.
can you just tell me, I'm not sure I'm seeing it, so from the kind of northeastern-ish boundary of his property down to, it's only a 50-foot drop, right? Am I reading that
Well,
right?
it's.
About 60.
60?
Yeah, there's 410 feet at the cul-de-sac above,
Okay,
so that's a good view of this. It's probably
About
better than what
340
we had
down
before.
here, and probably a little over 400 at the top, 410.
You would have, you'd have a good climb to get up there. And there are two areas that you could develop. There's one right here at the 350 mark,
Mhm.
and then the back one over there. And getting to it, I'm not quite sure how you get to it, but that's why they hire engineers to do that kind of thing. More importantly, just some history on this property. We did talk about it a while back. That property at one time was approved to put the mosque on the property. The Turkish Society of Rochester wanted to build a mosque and a community center on the site. They actually got approved for it. The mosque was quite a bit taller than a townhouse would be. They also had a minaret as well, as they were required to have. The big problem was in some of the areas on the property that they wanted to develop the mosque. The mosque was quite heavy as a structure. They could not get the footings and the bearings that they needed to for that building because some of that property had been filled in the past. It's not, to our knowledge, it's not toxic material, but what it was the old city furnaces used to have cinders that were, residual from the heating process. They would take and dump a lot of these out here and leave them there. So as a result, they did not get the footings that they were able to get without having to go quite a distance down. In this case, if you were to build townhouses, you could probably use a spread footer and not have a basement at this point in time, which would kind of solve that problem.
do they have to do tests on the soil to make sure it's not a brownfield? I mean, given that what happened across the road there.
The planning board would most probably require a test to be done to determine the viability of what they could and couldn't put on the site.
Do a phase one assessment first, you
Yeah.
look at historical photos. We did one similarly going south on the picture here. So the old Pecora property up through there, we did a phase one on that to see, look at historical photos, just see if there's evidence of dumping or what else is going on the site. You do a visual inspection on the site, and then based on what you come back with on the phase one, if it's suspected or, then you do what's called a phase two, then you go and do core samples or, some other environmental testing. But knowing this area, knowing some of the stuff that was dumped here in the past, we've got some history, so we would probably ask for a phase two right off the bat to do some environmental testing. The Melly property next door, there is a lot of ash and stuff that was deposited there. Even though it is an R120 zone, that does have a use variance for that. It's our only use
Still,
variance.
one's ever gotten one, yeah.
But obviously, you can't put a single-family house on ash or, potential for any sort of environmental issue. That's why they've gotten mini storage down there. So that's a use that, you don't have public impact to it or kids playing in it or anything else. It's not, a waste site, but, there is stuff you wouldn't want a single-family house on. So that's.
The county does have a map that identifies suspected and confirmed waste sites. Most of the properties.
So you're saying you could build townhouses, which is
Well, we're assuming that
unrestricted
there's,
residential on ash?
well, it's not ash, it's actually cinders, cinder material. But to give you an example, that the two buildings that are in the yellow zone there, the old Silveri Brothers, and this is the Birds Unlimited now, those two buildings have the same problem. They were built on something called a spread footer, which there's no basement on the site, but they spread out, they distribute the weight over the base of the slab so that it kind of floats on the site and doesn't, you're not having the problems in terms of sinking, that kind of thing.
I think it's
Those
the
two buildings
environmental
are-
concerns I'd be more worried about.
Pardon?
I think it's the environmental concerns I'd be worried about.
Oh, absolutely, and I think he would have to do that. I mean, everybody along here has had to do it. That's how we picked up, and that's why there's so much density out there on the apartment
I
complex.
think that would be cost prohibitive, because they probably have to haul off all that.
He would have to talk about that and as part of his narrative to the planning board as to whether it'd be worth his effort to do it. I'm certain they would probably go ahead and do it before they ever came to the board, just to see what they could and could not do. The engineering firms would require that, so they're not just laying
Well,
something out they
their
can't
bank
do.
would probably require that. too.
Absolutely. So, I mean, and that's the problem with Empire Boulevard, is that, you know, it was a beautiful area at one time. We all saw the picture of the trolley running down through over the float bridge on one lane. But as people moved into that area, that property along the bay was polluted for a lot of the time because you couldn't get water to the lake, and vice versa. So as a result, people just started using it as dump sites, and all of Empire Boulevard is basically a dump site on both sides.
Well,
Yeah. Have you ever seen DEC environmental easements over an entire property before? Do you have any
We have them, yes.
here in town?
Yeah,
So you know where they are?
yeah. I
Pretty-
mean,
yeah,
we've
pretty
got,
much, yeah.
Like the old carriage cleaners
Yeah.
and stuff down in Panorama Plaza. Is
we
where
have them
it's-
over our parkland. You know, you do anything on that park property that requires a shovel to go into the soil, like a footer for a bathroom or something like that, you have to remediate that area. It's part of the deal.
It all depends on to what extent. We have a couple, I've seen a couple I'm dealing with now, that the only prohibitive use is any residential. And that because no use of groundwater is drinking water.
Right.
Though it depends what's spelled out in the terms of the easement.
Well, we had to sign an agreement, and when we did that for the parks, we are going to have to be required to
So
remediate.
they vary on site, what
Yeah.
the terms are, but
This is not on the listed property, so it's not on the list. We just know there's other stuff in the area, so it's just-
Yeah, and we wouldn't have known
we
that
know
until,
that by the abstract that nothing's encumbering that.
not to our knowledge, no. There's never been any activity on this that would require anybody to do that, so. That's not to say that it couldn't happen, but I have a feeling that, you know, he's gonna have to do some environmental testing for us to make sure he can put something on there now that we know there's an issue. The work's been done, actually. I mean, there's an engineering firm, a local engineering firm that has that data. And he's aware of that, and he would probably get that data.
Shouldn't it be checked in the abstract whether or not such an easement's been filed for the parcel?
We could ask for it, but I would know that if
That's
we
the
did
only way
anything,
to
there was
really-
just never any activity to warrant it. I mean, the only reason we had to do it is because we went out and bought the parkland and had to remediate it because we knew there was a problem.
In that case, but
Yeah.
maybe wouldn't it be a,
Yeah, you could ask.
Good
When,
check
the last
before.
time when the property
Just to
was
make
being
sure.
filled, there was no DEC. And they've only come in for one application, and that never moved forward with the DEC, so I'm not certain the DEC even knows there's an issue here.
like I say, I'm really leery about that now because I'm dealing with two sites like it,
Mhm.
you know, and that was before DEC as well.
Yeah,
So that's why I bring it up.
okay.
Just to
Yeah,
move slowly as far as,
yeah, I mean, before he
that-
came in,
just to make sure.
before he
there
came in
aren't
for
any-
any development, we'd have to have that information. He'd want that information as well. There's no sense in him spending money if he can't do what he wants to do with the site. So that's kind of where we are. Now, if he wants to, he can come in now and he can develop townhouse development on the yellow portion of the property if he wanted to do that, assuming he meets all the criteria for development purposes.
It just leaves him right now. The zoning doesn't follow the lot line, so I think his biggest thing is just give a consistent zoning one way or the other, because you kind of got an odd line through your property, so it's not a whole lot you can do in one zone versus the other. So whether you rezone it all to LaSalle's Landing or you rezone it to townhouse, I think at least they're looking for some consistency to.
Well, normally I'd say also, I mean, it is zoned R120, you could possibly look at estate lots up there. The only problem is, they're looking down on Millie Brothers construction sites, so they're not, it's not like you're getting these vistas and views to anything that's warranted to be costly for that type of development.
Thoughts, issues?
He's looking for a change to what status for his property?
I think he's requested that we look at LaSalle's Landing as the option because he knows that he can develop townhouses in LaSalle's Landing.
So it would go from R120 to,
LaSalle's Landing. The LaSalle's Landing portion, ironically, the LaSalle's Landing portion there, if you were to do a single-family zone,
mhm.
he could not build single-family homes in the LaSalle's Landing district. It wasn't
Okay.
designed to do that.
Strictly prohibits it.
It
So
does
That's
prohibit
why
it.
he's got a major conflict between the two zoning districts. R120 is single family and LaSalle's Landing prohibits single family residential, so he's kind of got a split parcel with half in and half out.
As I say, you could look at that as an option. You could look at a new zoning district such as townhouse or something of that nature to give him what he needs for density.
You guys need more information? Do you need more time?
But you need environmentals on it, make a decision.
I mean, we can ask if they've got any additional information ahead of time on that.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, once you get into site plan.
Well, he's
we'll get
sitting
more.
right there, right behind you, so you can
I don't know
ask
if
that
we wanna-
question. if you want.
What's the, I'm sorry, what was the question?
Do you know of any environmental constraints to the property in terms of easements or DEC requirements as to what you can and can't do with it?
No,
Not at this time?
no, not at this time. Nothing that would prohibit townhomes, definitely. So, no, nothing out of the
And I
ordinary.
assume that's what, we've talked in the past, that's what you're looking for, is the possibility of
Correct.
townhomes on the site.
It just makes so much sense in terms of a buffer and an easing into the rest of the businesses there. But just like you correctly pointed out, as it stands right now, it's it's half of nothing. I personally want to live there, so it would be something nice, but it would be the townhomes, and my family would be there as well.
Yeah, I remember when this was done, they went through the middle of the property because there's a gore line. You can kind of see the gore line that comes down through. Gore line isn't necessarily a property line. It just identifies the gores from the Phelps and Gorham purchase when they laid everything out. And they used that line as the indicator for the zoning. In doing that, we kind of put him in an awkward position, or the owners at that time in an awkward position as to how to utilize the property. You know, as I say, there are 13,000 properties in Penfield. We're looking at probably 10 out of the 13,000. So we've been kind of, you know, selective as to what we would bring to you to look at.
I mean, tonight doesn't need to be the be-all and end-all. If you need a little more soak time on this one, we can wait on it if the groups...
What are the permitted uses in the LaSalle's Landing district?
There are numerous. You're allowed to have townhouse, you're allowed to have multi-residential, which would be apartment buildings. You're allowed to have commercial activities, restaurants, office space. The things you can't have would be things like big box development. You can't have a Walmart or, you know, a Target or a Wegmans. That's a good idea, Doug. Let's pull it up. There's a cadre of uses that would be, or identified to be used for water type uses, but the problem with this area is that it's really restrictive in terms of water depth and some other issues, accessibility. So here's a good example: public parks, playgrounds, similar recreational uses, multifamily dwellings and apartment buildings, townhouses, and single-family attached, which means townhouses. Commercial parks, playgrounds, beaches, parks, golf courses. You're not going to get any of those in there. Sit down and take out restaurants, motels, hotels, stores, shops, boutiques, offices, and then they get into things like car top, boat launches, and
More water-related stuff.
more water-related materials. So obviously, I don't think we're excited about seeing any type of commercial activity on that site because it's going to be difficult getting in and out on a sustained basis. But in terms of some type of low-intensive residential use, I think it does lend itself as a good transitional buffer from the two single-family streets to the east down to the commercial to the west.
So why zone it LaSalle's Landing and not just zone it townhouses only?
You have that option. I mean, you can recommend anything you want. That's why we're here. We're just here to facilitate whatever it is you want. You do not have to keep that as, you could say, we recommend that that portion of the LaSalle's Landing is taken out and that the entire property be rezoned to townhouse. You could do that.
If I can add one minor thing, the topography itself makes it very challenging to begin with. And obviously having it split makes it even more. But there would be a ton of green space as well, just because mainly of the topography, just the way it lays out. We talked about it, just seems to make a lot of sense for the area. Definitely not commercial. I don't think that would
You have an
make sense for
idea
anyone.
as to how many units you'd be thinking about?
I really don't, mainly because the engineer's report is going to kind of tell that better at this point. You could guesstimate, but it really wouldn't be the truth. I wish I could answer. I don't know.
And is your desire to have it zoned LaSalle's Landing or townhouses?
I mean, ultimately, the idea is to do townhouses. So that was the thought to begin with. So I don't think it's fine either way, really. Whatever makes more sense.
Have you identified how many, if you were to build single-family residential, how many units you could get on the site?
As you said, I think it would be very difficult just because of what it's going to overlook to begin with as well. I don't know, that singles.
Well, a lot of it
just
comes
really-
down to how much it's gonna cost to put the infrastructure.
Well, that's the
for it.
thing, because it's so difficult, if there needs to be a little bit of density, that's where the townhomes that really make sense. It doesn't have to be, an apartment complex. But I can say that the previous approval that you mentioned accounted for so much more traffic than what this
No
would
question.
be. I mean, it would easy quadrupled.
No question about that.
Does your townhouse zoning offer any incentives, density incentives?
Not really, no.
Exchange
So,
for
in
green
other words,
space
if you
or-
offer up for a higher density in exchange for more common lands? and
Well,
things
they're
like
going to
that.
they're gonna have a lot of green space because the topography just is not gonna allow them to develop that area.
No, I know that, but
I mean, even through townhouse,
I
you
mean,
would go
you
through.
can set it up for a zero lot line right
Put
around the
through
footprint of the building and then
A
have
cluster,
everything-
you go at
and then have
270.
everything owned by a HOA.
Right, yes, it would all be owned by an HOA. The town would not be interested in taking that land. That's just a maintenance nightmare to deal with, so they would have to take care of that. Your thoughts?
Seems like a reasonable request to me. I can certainly appreciate wanting to have, if nothing else, uniformity in the zoning for one single parcel. Townhomes seem like they would fit the area. I mean, I could imagine the homeowners wouldn't potentially want down the road a McDonald's in their backyard if it does get
Right.
zoned LaSalle's Landing.
That's what
But
I
if it's
was
specifically
fearful of.
zoned townhomes
It's
only.
putting something in that yellow quadrant there, which is not that far really, from those cul-de-sacs.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the consideration that we talked about, even with the other property, the impact that it has on the existing properties in terms of leaving the value alone, increasing or decreasing the value of those properties. I think if it were zoned LaSalle's Landing, it would decrease the value of those.
It would, and the problem with LaSalle's Landing
Properties.
is I get nervous because, obviously everything is reviewed by the town, so if for some reason it was rezoned, and nothing was built in 5 years, somebody can say, I wanna build
Well,
an
exactly.
apartment complex, or I wanna build a McDonald's, and now you're kind of in a quandary, but I think with some qualifiers, you did a good job the last time we were talking about the other one. Qualifiers such as low density, it doesn't have to be 100 units, obviously it can't be anyways, but low density development, preservation of slopes and green space areas were applicable. and trying to create a true buffer between the neighbors to the east and to the commercial to the west. And we'll prepare something for you to look at that if that's amenable to you.
So townhouse zoning then.
So is this group supportive of recommending townhouse?
Yes.
Show of hands. Majority rules.
The third property we also looked at was at 1506 Empire Boulevard. It's kind of an interesting property. It's just up the hill a little bit from here. Many of you may know that as the old Hilltop Farm Market property. It was owned by a gentleman by the name of Russell Ballman, who just passed away last year at 100 years old or close to it. He probably was the original farmer for that whole area, truth be told, at one time before it was a 4-lane highway. The property behind his house at one time was farmland that he owned. It was all developed out in the 60s. It was known as Littlewood Lane East. The property is zoned R112. I think the intent back in 1980 was that they'd have smaller houses on the site, recognizing that nobody was going to build a 20,000 square foot house on that site. In that period of time, over the last 40 years or so, I think it's become apparent that nobody's going to build a single-family residence on Empire Boulevard, especially at that location. It has given it the air of being a commercial operation for many, many years. Remember, they had a lot of the concrete statues out there that people were buying, and a lot of garden material, that kind of stuff. He is now looking to rezone that to, I think, limited business.
So it's got either MR or LB.
Merit LB, yeah. So it certainly doesn't lend itself to single-family residential in any case. There's nothing around it other than to the properties at the back. There is a change in grade. You can see that if Doug can pull that up. This property is much lower than the properties to the east. You can see the backyards at 44 and 46 are at 440. He's down to 410 in what is the parking lot of the business now. So there's quite a change in grade. Again, there would have to be some kind of a buffer between the residences to the east and this property if that were to be something other than residential. Do we have the aerial of that? So there is a bit of a buffer, as you can see, along the property lines to the residential. We certainly want to maintain that as best as we could and probably enhance it if there was to be a change in zoning.
Would that be enough with the proposed change in zoning?
I don't know.
Depends what the zoning is, you probably gonna need a variance or
That's up to
something
the
if you're going
zone.
from, LB to single-family residential.
You would have
It could be about
LB, you would need a
100 foot.
50-foot setback buffer.
Okay.
That's a buffer, not,
Well, I know.
nothing could be built in that. And then you would
Against
start
the
from that point.
residential, that is.
Right, right. And he's got residential on the south and the east. He's got multi-residential on the north. You'd still have to have a 50-foot buffer. You can notice that there's a pre-existing non-conforming situation here, as he was the first one in the neighborhood. And everybody built around him.
So 50-foot buffers against the north and the east.
Right. North, south, and east. So with the pre-existing, I don't know if they would keep the house or what they would do with it, but if they kept the house, it would be a pre-existing non-conforming structure to the zoning because it's currently there. Again, the other part of that is there's nothing in that MR district that's part of the Hillhaven property. I guess we could take a look at the grades on that again too if you wanted. So they kind of fall pretty well too. You've got 10-foot intervals on those grades. So you're talking 30 feet from the road halfway up the property. They could probably do something adjacent to the residences more than they could adjacent to this site. The site currently is vacant. They're using it for storage right now, but it's not being utilized on any commercial basis. It was a farm market 2 years ago. It was vacant last summer. And they used it as a staging area for a period of time when they were doing the Empire Boulevard improvements as well, so it's just kind of sitting there now. Across the street, you have at 1513, I believe, that is the metal roof outlet that was put in a couple of years ago. The beer hall is just to the north of that, and right where the cursor is a new veterinary hospital being constructed. And that house with, across the street doesn't exist anymore, it was taken down to the veterinary hospital. There's that one little property to the south of that, which is, I believe, a single-family residence as well. I guess I would look at that as an option too, possibly changing that.
Rezoning the one,
Yeah,
rezone the other at the same time, if you're gonna make that. Then you really leave an island out there on the road.
yeah, I mean, then you just let the single-family residence out by itself with everything else around it as commercial. As I say, if you don't, you know, if you want to look at it in more detail, if you want to go back and look at it, we can certainly do that, that's up to you.
What kind of uses would he be allowed in that proposed change?
If you were to go to limited business, again, smaller type uses, you can't do a big box in those either, there's a constraint on the size of the buildings. If we're limited, yeah, go back up. So these are the kind of things limited businesses would prefer, office space, grocery stores, banks, laundromats. I'm reading from what I know to be in the business non-retail zoning district. Grocery stores, laundromats, bakeries, drugstores, hardware stores, garden supply, barber and beauty shops, flower shops, liquor stores, retail, auto accessories and parts but no repairs. And then conditionally permitted uses, those would be, it's allowed to be in our, sit-down restaurants, takeout restaurants, combinations of single-family and business uses. This is,
This was a special use permit?
they all do, yes.
For the
Yeah, all the
town.
conditionally
Yeah.
permitted uses do, that's right. And then there's a catch-all that says, there's a K somewhere.
Well, it's E in this.
It's E in this one, usually it's K, but in this one it's E. So the other uses deemed to be acceptable and complementary to what's permitted in the district, the zoning board of appeals or the town board could grant a permit based on what they propose. But in essence, it's basically been a de facto commercial site for 45, 50 years now.
Yeah, fine with
There, that's that house. And here's the property.
Thoughts on this one?
Now, before you say anything, let me just say that when we talk about retail, you see the length of those buildings. I mean, theoretically, that could be a, quote, strip mall if it were laid out and could meet the criteria for a development proposal. Doesn't necessarily mean it would be, but I could see something, you won't see just like one building in there, you know, something of that nature. You'd see something bigger, I would think.
It could be office space too, or
It could be,
or
yes.
bank, or
Yeah.
Beyond the
Or another
little
dentist.
individual house, if you keep going in that direction,
Going
what,
south.
yeah,
Yeah.
what's there?
It's the back end of, actually a farm field that comes off of Creek Street.
Yeah, you know,
Street.
Sunscape, the.
Yeah, yeah.
That carries
they
all the
grow
way down the
stuff
hill.
there.
I mean, it goes
Okay.
over quite a slope, so they don't farm all the way down to the bottom.
Right,
yeah, okay.
And the grade change is pretty substantial there too.
That comes all the way back. Here's Creek Street over on the side, so that's the deep farm lot of,
so in terms of the grade though, does the grade go downhill from that property toward the farmland?
no.
No, it
starts
follows
up
the same
higher.
grade.
Okay,
Mostly.
The grade's falling from east to west.
okay, all
So it's
right,
falling,
not from north to south, okay,
Yeah.
yeah, it's kind of parallel with Empire Boulevard.
gotcha.
But you can see how close the contours are to each other down
Mhm.
here,
yeah.
the area that you were concerned about. It's pretty tight. You're falling 10 feet at the road, basically, to the
Yeah, right
edge
there
of the
is.
hill.
That's why you can't see the
Falls
farm field right at the
south
road,
of the
it's
road.
kind of steep rise, and then the farm
All
field's
the
kind
lines
of
down south to the road.
If for some reason that were to be developed at some point in time in the future, even as residential, and they had to get a curb cut or an access point onto that property from Empire Boulevard, they would have to cut both sides out and create
Huge,
retaining
yeah.
walls to get to a point where they'd
It
be able
would
to
be more
get.
apparent to come in from Creek Street.
Oh, no
top
question.
Down than to come off of Empire.
No question. Or extend Littlewood Lane East, which it was intended to do at some point in the future. You can see there's a
Well, Peak Hill
key
Lane.
turnaround
Peak
there.
Hill Lane also stubs to
Yeah.
it, so there was an intent to
So there were-
loop that.
There were alternative sites to get to from this one. Your thoughts?
I would think that the types of buffers, though, too, between that property and residential to the east, particularly to the east, because that enterprise was not very robust, let's just
No,
say, you know.
that's true.
There wasn't a lot going on,
That's
there
true.
wasn't business at night, that sort of stuff.
Right.
I think that the buffers would not just have to be like a bunch of trees. There would potentially have to be something to make sure that there wasn't a lot of like light pollution coming in, a lot of other kind of noise and, you know, it would have to be a more sort of aggressive type of buffering.
It's when it comes in the planning board as a site plan.
Yeah, if it's allowed to become something that
And the
has a
buffer
much
has to be
more,
addressed. Yeah, sorry.
if, excuse me, if it is something that does have a much more heavily traveled, more frequently used, especially if it's used at different times of the day than the market was and stuff, that buffering be really a much more comprehensive thing than just a bunch of pine trees.
You think some type of wall or something?
Maybe a berm
Fence.
with, you know, a big berm
Yeah.
with the buffering on top of it,
Mhm.
with then some trees to block it, some, you know, sort of something like that.
Okay.
The rest
Does
of the
anybody, well, before we leave it, does anybody have any alternative type of zoning that you think would be an appropriate use for the site that would provide him more than what he's got now? It might have less of an impact to the
I mean, you
neighbors
could look
to
at
the east.
B&R. I'm trying to think of uses of,
You're talking office space, you're
say,
talking
office space right on
banks,
Empire Boulevard.
funeral homes. That's not a good location for a funeral.
No, as I'm saying, if you looked at, the next step back would be B&R, so now you've got office space or dentist office or something, you know, is that, I guess how viable is that along that stretch of Empire Boulevard, or is it more of a retail?
Well, heaven knows, we need more dentist office in town, you know.
Dentist, hair salons, and,
Yeah, here's,
what else?
I think we got one vote for LB, not to put words in your mouth, Roland, but I think you, so not to put words in your mouth, but I think you said you were there for it, just trying
Yeah,
to.
I think that would be fine with,
What's everybody else thinking?
keep in mind that any site would have to go before planning.
Oh,
board, and
absolutely.
Things like the buffering is then addressed at
Absolutely.
that time, as a for instance.
Come on, guys, I know you're out there, I can hear you breathing.
I mean, we could put LaSalle, I mean, you could look at LaSalle's
Would
Landing.
wouldn't multi-residence be, make more sense?
That's one of the options
Because
he's
you have,
proposing.
you know,
You could extend that
Right,
MR
that's what I
down.
mean, is, yeah. I guess I just worry with the limited business and having, kind of what Donna was saying about that, the houses there, you know. seeing something.
I wouldn't mind that. My only concern is, I always thought LaSalle's Landing would be a mixed-use district, and it's becoming a apartment district. And if you put more apartments in, you've taken away from the variety that you could possibly have out there. Not a bad idea, it's probably a good use for the site, it's just that it just becomes so homogeneous now with the same use that you're not getting anything else.
You could go with sales landing there, or restaurant or something else that,
You could do that in LB zone. Do we want a restaurant there, I guess is the question. It goes back to your comment. You do have single-family homes right behind it. You've got odors, you got night lighting and whatever. It's not the easiest place to get in and out of either. I mean, none of those places along Empire are. Want to spend more time thinking about it? Or are you there?
I'm fine with limited business.
You are? Everybody?
show of
With-
hands.
Yeah, with caveats.
With caveats.
So,
And you're gonna be able to embellish that when you get to a point where you're gonna have a final document to look at. All right, the next property. 1271 Fairport 9 Mile Point Road, it's owned by the Bendel family, who happen to be here with us this night. This property is currently zoned rural agricultural 2-acre. The property just south is actually where Falvo's funeral home is, I believe. And to the north is Abington Place, which was an incentive zoning. We talked about incentive zoning during the education process. It was an incentive zoning program that ended up giving the developer 101 houses. They're patio homes. It was identified as being a alternative housing development type, primarily to serve, it could be general, but primarily to serve seniors. It's kind of becoming that. I think the owners would like to see the density change to the site. The owners have received previously a conceptual approval, strictly conceptual approval, to increase density to allow them to have 27 homes similar in nature to what's to the north. They have not pursued that yet for any type of approval process, but it's still
That's through incentive zoning.
it's still on the books as an incentive zoning program for them, if they want it. So I think that they're looking for other types of uses on the property, possibly even some kind of senior care facility to the front at some point in the future, and then a variety of housing to the rear. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is that kind of where you're thinking right now?
Just, I'd like to get higher density in the back and. Ideally, I'd like the business to stay there as some type of business, garden store type business.
how many acres is the property?
17.
17 acres?
It's RA2 right now, so that's our highest zoning district currently. So it's residential, agricultural, 2-acre. Even if you looked at like an R1 and you're looking at a 1 acre, so you double your density with a 1 acre development. But obviously, as you can look to the north, you can see the other stuff is kind of built out. That's R120 in there. You've got that's Cranberry Cove. Abington is, as Jim went through, is that one is incentive zoning, so they got a higher density on that one. And then you can see Barclay is kind of a townhouse development, again through incentive zoning, kind of equates more to a townhouse development. So
There are 24 units on each side.
the build out around it has changed. It's just been through an incentive zoning process rather than a straight rezoned application. And then
Town board has a lot higher densities in this neighborhood, although 250 is kind of the indicated demarcation zone. They have not allowed any higher density out to the east side of 250, and I don't anticipate anything happening in the near future in that regard. There's some limitations on the east side anyways with respect to lack of sanitary sewers. Town of Webster's, we talked about in the past, is still in the process of trying to figure out how to provide additional service to this area. I'm not quite sure if they have it or not at this point in time.
they're doing upgrades to their sewer treatment plants. They're getting there. They're just upgrading the plant and they'll have more capacity once they get that under control. I think if we look at this one parcel here, you look at kind of the couple of parcels around it, you know, you've got Fellow Funeral Home, you've got the back of that piece, you know, the piece next to it. So I'd say you kind of look at that block there, and does it make more sense to be a 1 acre or R120 or something, matching what's adjacent to it?
You could say we provided a stub road to be able to access this property at some point in the future.
Would that be the only way to access the property?
No, you could come in, you can come in from Route 250 as well. We wanted 2 means of access. Theoretically, there could even be 3 means of access at some point in time.
Well,
This property goes to...
state law has recently changed. If you go more than 33 homes, you need to have 2 points of access.
That's
In the
right.
past, it wasn't as hard and fast. But in the past, say, 2 years, they've changed it, so now you have to go higher than 33 homes, you need to have at least 2 access points. So they'd have to show another connection out to the front, you know, loop through, and then you could have a cul-de-sac in the back or something, but that's meeting the fire code and having emergency egress and access for ambulances and fire trucks.
So the entry point to the east that connect to 250 would go through a business or go through a parking lot? How does that?
I mean, obviously, you know, it could come in here, it could come, you know, up through here. Obviously, you know, Bill would figure out his business, his house here, and there's another property next door that, you know, obviously could have an access point here. We've got an access currently that goes into Fellow Funeral Home, so there could be, that's what I said, I think you'd want to look at it regionally to say, you know, if you're going to rezone just this property, rezone or look at the 4 or 5 properties around it, and then if at least it was going to develop, you develop it as a, at least as a, I'll say collectively, because they're owned by different people, but you'd plan how it tie together. Similarly, as we made sure there was a stub from Maya Drive, you're trying to say, okay, we know something may happen in the future to the south, let's plan for it and accommodate for it. Maya Drive extends to the end, that extends towards the back, there's another farmland to the west. Currently, they're not interested in developing, but the thought is eventually, you know, there could be a connection to Jackson Road, just to kind of, you know, interconnected grid streets and.
Can you put the wetlands map on?
Yeah, there's
With some of the property,
a fair portion of federal
Take a
wetland,
moment.
if it pops up in the middle.
There it is.
Mhm.
so some of the property to the southwest is in a federal wetland. I don't think it's intended to disturb that in any way anyways, but it does limit what they can do on the property in terms of developing the entire site. Same is true with Balbo's property behind there. They're limited, half that property can't be developed.
And then as you go further south, there's state wetland as you get in towards the Berry property, and that's the back of Argini and.
Are your buildings currently on sewer or
Our house is on a force main.
enforcement?
There's a connection.
Would they reach gravity to the north?
There is a sewers on Colton Court that comes to the end, so it depends.
Would they reach
They may have to
gravity?
fill a portion of Bill's property.
Pardon?
They may have to fill a portion of the property to get to the grades they need to
Yeah,
get to.
Bill's been working on doing some fill in there to raise it up a little bit to make sure that gravity works for it.
Right now, I do farming in the back, it's getting a little awkward back there with the houses lined up.
They kind of watch us.
Yeah.
And
Not that
wave.
they watch us.
They wave. I'm like, hi. But it's okay.
Well, traditionally, farmers have had to deal with complaints from neighbors for different
Yeah.
I don't
things.
think they don't actually like him, so they don't complain.
Well, you don't cause the problems that, herbicides and that kind of stuff, you're not doing.
Yeah, even early morning noise and dust
I know,
and.
but we try to
things that-
limit that because of that, you know.
We used to have farmers that would actually fly their planes over their fields and
Yeah.
spray everything
Oh,
within
did they?
a radius as far as they could get
I mean,
it.
you've got the right to farm, obviously people are moving into more agricultural areas, but that's
Yeah,
always
I
the
think they
conflict you
like
run into
seeing
is.
the farm and watching things grow, and I do think
Yeah.
they like that.
That's probably why
They
they
never,
moved
they
there.
never come over and help, though.
No. And,
Can we-
yeah, I do think they,
As long as they come over and buy, that's all that matters.
Yeah.
they do that, which is helpful.
Do you separate it into 2 different parcels with 2 different zones?
Now, if you're gonna do that, you should do it at the property lines and not what we experienced on Empire Boulevard with,
I mean, you can still operate an agricultural business, and then if you made it to R1, you can still do, I mean, you can still do an R120. Our code tries to allow existing uses to continue on. We don't try to say, okay, now you're, R120 or half-acre zoning, you can no longer operate, an agricultural operation or farm market. Our code still allows you to operate in that. So if you rezone it to 1 acre or half acre, you change the whole thing. The back could be developed as half acre, the front could remain a farm market or develop in the future. It doesn't preclude him from
no,
continuing to
the only thing
operate.
he has to be conscious of is the fact that he wants to maintain an agricultural exemption, and he needs to do that by having at least 5 acres and making so much per year, or 7 acres and making less per year than what we get, correct? So, I
5
mean, that would be
acres,
his big
50,000, 7 acres is 10.
Right.
So that's to keep their ag exemptions. And basically, when you fall under an ag district, you need to make so much money for the assessor, and it falls under the actual farming the property, not just, yeah, I've got open space land and I'm getting an ag exemption. You're not generating an income off it. You're not truly farming the property.
But, let me ask sort of a converse question then. So let's say that this property were kept, let's say 7 acres was kept, 10 acres was kept as farm, but it was zoned so that houses could go up on it, and as you were saying, you could kind of keep the farming aspect of it. Presumably, the portion of the land that is not devoted to farming would be taxed at the higher rate,
Right.
yes?
It's always taxed for what it's being used for. So even if, we're not, but if we rezone this to GB's, general business or limited industrial, they're still being assessed, and Buck will shoot me down if I get too far in the weeds on assessments, but you're still assessed for what the use of the property is, not what it's zoned or not what, it could be.
Right.
So if it's not being used as,
It could be commercial, but if you're still using it as a single-family residence, it's being zoned, it's being assessed as a single-family residence.
So then they would lose their agricultural exemption completely if they were to put,
All of
say,
it?
houses?
Yes. As a matter of fact, sometimes, in some cases, the developer will come in and have to pay back some of the benefit that he's received for a period of time while he was in the ag district.
It's in an ag district, so I think the look back is 5 years.
Right.
If it weren't in an ag district, I think it's 7 years.
so yeah, if you develop the back half, it would be assessed as single-family homes, and those people would pay, the rate for whatever their house is, or their assessed valuation, and then if the front remained in a use or a farm market, it would be assessed, and as long as they kept at least the 5 acres and, showed they're generating income off the property, they would keep their ag exemption on the front. Yeah, pretty close. So that's showing just over 5 acres for that piece. But you would look at, rezone the entire parcel. As Doug is showing, you could bring a road in, you'd have to find a second means of access, because you now have potentially more than 33 homes on a stub off the back. How would be served by a second means of egress? But
Well, they could actually bring where Bill's house is, you got that one bump there, you could kind of subdivide that into the other parcel and bring that in as the road.
all site plan stuff you could get into.
Yeah.
So may I ask a question? So would your goal be to be able to sell off a substantial portion of it to a developer, or would you choose to be sort of the developer of the land itself?
No, I would sell it off.
You'd sell it off?
Mhm.
Okay.
And I would keep 5, not 7, I'd keep 5 and sell 12.
But at some point in time, I gotta believe you don't wanna be farming the rest of your
Well,
land.
I think,
But it's a 100-year-old business, and, it's just, I just think that maybe there's someone out there still,
There probably is.
Yeah.
um,
It may evolve from where it is now, but we've evolved from a long way from where
Right.
it was 100 years ago.
Sure.
When-
Everything changes.
Yeah, things
well, if you
change.
had a lot of ambition, it could be very, very lucrative. I think that people should know that, but we do understand that very few people want to work 7 days a week and do all that labor that you have to do, and I recognize that you have to be unique to do that. And we've done it for 40 years, so I feel that we've done it a lot longer than a lot of people would handle that. So it's a special group of people or
Yeah.
person that would have to take that over. But in order to retire, we need the higher density in the back, or we're just gonna keep the whole thing. So we've just decided that we'll either keep it, or we're gonna ask for higher density so that we can make it more lucrative for all of you to have more tax land, and we won't use the back, but we'll still keep the front for now.
So I'm thinking, right now, the town board gave you the potential for 27 units.
Right.
What would you get if that density were higher? On 17.8, well, 17.
12 acres, so if
acres.
it's half acre, you're at 24.
Yeah,
So it's 20.
the only difference is that the developer's not paying you and then also paying the town for the improvement.
Yeah, I mean, you're,
If he pays for the land and then pays the incentive, drives the price point up. And then it drives the price of the house up. I have talked to them, but they seem to get discouraged. You know.
Well, it's tough, I mean, you're getting double
Yeah.
dipped as
I
a
say, you're
developer.
paying for the land and you're paying for.
You try to stay away, I mean, you're
increased density.
probably, you're the last person that we've had really a serious discussion about incentive zoning on.
Yeah.
That was a couple of years ago now, we haven't
Mhm.
done anything in the last couple of years on that. So I'm assuming the town board would like to, you know, step away from that process and get it back to a more equitable situation.
Could you put on the wetlands overlay again, please? What's the thought on the wetlands to the south and the west?
They are federal wetlands. We've applied.
Conservation easement of sort, or?
I mean, you could incorporate into it, obviously we wouldn't let it be buildable property. We're working right now with the
Unless
DEC
they
to
got
clean
a
through there.
permit from the Army Corps.
But then you can do 1/10 of an acre, without having to remediate or mitigate, property. You can only do 1/10 of an acre disturbance of federal wetland. We're working right now to get that stream cleaned, so we've got a joint app in between the DEC and the Army Corps to clean that, to keep the farmland viable. But then we've obviously got the piece behind Felbo's in the back that, that's kind of just been sitting for now. I know they've got thoughts or ideas on something to do with that, so I'd say maybe look at that block of properties, not just one.
So just
Parcel.
subdivide through it as is,
What's that?
again, so subdivide through it, so to speak, as is.
Yeah. You also got to look at what's to the west, and you've got RR1 to the west. So I think we'd have to take a larger look if you're going to go down to half-acre zoning or something smaller. Now we're getting more density, and then you've got buffer to the west, but I think if you extend at least the 1 acre zone over, obviously you've doubled the base density of what's allowed, so even if you're going to incentive, you've
The
reduced.
2010 plan called for higher densities in the RR1 zone to the west. And that's kind of how some of the development occurred.
So you've kind of got the RR1 goes quite a ways over. And you've got developments that have happened through cluster, Town Law 278, they've clustered to do those other developments, but all that green is RR1. It's kind of hard to differentiate between the R8, thank you, RA2.
But if you look at Mary View Drive, that's a townhouse project. You look at Tuscany just to the east of that.
That was incentive zoning, Tuscany Lane was incentive
Right.
zoning, so obviously a lot of developers have come to the town board and have done other ways to get the zoning that they've needed to develop it. You can see the Town Law 281, which is the same as 278. 278 again is a cluster, so people are looking for smaller lots, higher density. They've just gotten their different methods than just going what the base zoning is. So obviously there's a demand for higher density or smaller lot sizes. they've either come in with incentive zoning or, done a cluster development. I mean, we could look at, you could look at moving at least the RR1 line over a little further, which would go from 2 acre zoning to 1 acre zoning if you looked at, from where that is, and then move that up to 250. Extend that block over. We've got this one little spot of LB down there, which used to be the Harris Seed Corporation. I think that's currently vacant right now, and there's some sheds on the property, but that's kind of a one-off, LB zone. But I think you could look at moving that, the 1 acre line over at least, and increasing some of the density in that section. As Jim said, the town board's kind of been pretty stringent on that 250 north-south as kind of being their dividing line between leaving what is agricultural to the east and looking at any sort of development on the west side. Thoughts, concerns, comments?
Well, I could see going to the 1 acre zoning for a couple of different reasons. First of all, people are kind of accustomed to farmland there. It's kind of a nice transition. And it doesn't, Jim made a point earlier talking about almost a sort of a cookie cutter effect of having the same types of things, too much of the same type of things in the same type of areas. So to have the larger zoning in that area for larger residential homes, sort of in a way for sort of an aesthetic reason and for a sort of a diversifying the environment and the retail environment for buying homes in the area. And also with the larger homes, you're probably going to bring in probably at least 75% of the tax revenue you would bring in if you had R120 zoning and having it carved up into half-acre lots, but you're going to have half of the impact on school taxes for the rest of the residents of the town, because you're going to have only half the number of houses. So I think 1 acre zoning makes sense for those reasons.
The patio homes to the north, is that senior housing?
Targeted towards seniors.
It's targeted, but it's general housing. I mean, if you wanted to buy a unit, you certainly could do that. There's no restriction on you from doing that.
I've driven around there, I don't think I've ever seen a child.
No, it's basically people 50 and above, 50, yeah.
And they definitely targeted towards seniors, but I say it's not deep restricted to say you can't have a family in there.
Isn't that one of the types of housing that there's currently a shortage of or a higher demand for in Penfield?
Yeah, we've seen them, obviously those have gone quickly. We've seen the Barclay developed to the north. Arbor Ridge, if you're familiar, that one off of Fellows Road, that one sold out quickly. So yeah, any sort of senior patio, townhouse, HOA product is
You won't get
going.
seniors buying larger lots. They won't do it because they're not going to maintain it.
I don't even think the younger people want to do that anymore.
No, they don't. That's why Ryan's so popular, because they don't want to cut grass anymore.
No, they want
I'm
to
the
cut
only idiot that
grass, they
still
don't want
cuts
to have
his
a
yard.
house, they want to go on vacation. I just think that's, yeah.
If you look at the developments that have occurred in Penfield over the last 10 years, they're all small lot cluster developments at this point in time. Nobody's building 100 by 200 foot lots anymore. And there's certainly very few people building, although I won't say there are not, but there are very few people building in 1 acre zones. There's one just down the street here that Mr. D'Angelo built. He's got 11 units, but I think he's the only one that's really doing that right now. Maybe the one on Creek Street, Capstone, is that standard?
Yeah,
I think that's standard
that's
as
half
well.
acre.
Yeah. They're not seniors buying those houses.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, what are the lot sizes for the cluster of homes to the north there?
Currently those are, that'd be like an R1
12.
12.
Quarter of an acre, you can say.
Yeah, so it's an R1 12 would fall under current zoning.
So Don, I appreciate your point about diversification, but given the need for senior housing and given that it's already there, it seems like just kind of continuing that down, to me, would be appropriate.
If it were restricted to senior housing, then I would say, yeah. But it has an impact on the school district and on school taxes if it is not restricted to senior housing, because the school district has to build out according to the potential for how many kids might be going to school. So,
You're right, and you are in the Webster School District, of course, they have we were looking at maps today of Webster, they have a lot higher density than we have. They probably have more people in their town now than we have, and that was not the case a while back, but that's something you gotta look at, but again, you're right, I mean, if you're looking to help seniors, you're not gonna be building large houses on large lots.
So it's no impact on the Penfield schools, but we would get the revenue, the tax revenue?
The town tax.
You get the town
You
revenue,
get the town-
you won't get the school district in Webster will get the revenue for that.
yeah, so,
So you get the town revenue, you accommodate senior housing, which we have a shortage for, and there's no negative impact on the schools in Penfield.
But you can't
you
restrict,
push it to
you
Webster,
can't restrict
which-
housing for just seniors, you can't do that. You can build
We
you can
can.
build a community,
We can't, I mean,
we can, the developer could
could-
build a scenario that
The same type of
draws people
community.
to it as seniors.
I mean, they can deep restrict it, I mean, they can set that as a parameter for an HOA or a development. We as a town can't restrict it and say this has to be senior.
Yeah, I'm not even sure they can do that, to be perfectly honest. I mean, you can create a scenario where it lends itself to being a senior and not a young family. But I'm not so certain that anybody has the right to restrict age housing. Now, if you're building assisted living and that kind of thing, or memory care, it's a different issue. But just to go out and build a housing tract, I don't think you can restrict age.
So I've heard 1 acre zoning. Michael, did you have a number?
I would think just mimic what's right next to it, the quarter acre.
So you're at like an R112. What's the rest of the groups?
Yeah, I guess our priority is addressing some of the needs that the trends are showing. Does that make sense?
Maybe before you make that decision, the next one on the list actually is the neighbor to this area. It goes back to the comment you made, Mark, about maybe looking at it more globally than just one parcel at a time. Because you've got the properties there at Plank and Jackson. The owners of those properties are in the 1 acre zone. I think they're asking for R120, if I'm not mistaken. That is an area that is being looked at by developers as a hot area. It does have a problem in the fact that it currently does not have a sanitary sewer servicing it. It doesn't mean that you couldn't build one with a pump station to service it. We did talk about this at one of our prior educational evenings, where they would put a pump station in and then run the sewer back to Shoecraft Road on Plank Road going down Plank. But again, this is another one of those areas in the neighborhood that they're looking at higher density.
So how many homes could you fit on that if you changed to higher density?
Currently, we've
Currently, it's
identified as 72.
Yeah, it's
72 homes
72.
under R1. So if you went to R120, you're basically doubling that. I don't think we have any thoughts one way or the other on this. This is strictly just the owners of the property asking.
What school district is this?
It's the Webster district. Why don't you pull up the school map for a second, just to give everybody an idea how much of Webster's district is in Penfield. I know we talked a little bit about this in the past, but there you see, this is why Penfield doesn't win state championships in football anymore.
You can see where the farmers by the the YMCA is in the Webster School District down on 250. And then you go all the way up to, actually that's in Penfield Schools, Jackson and Plank over there. That's
Yeah,
Penfield
it's-
Schools right there.
Yeah.
So, who drew the lines where and when, but Jackson is in Penfield School Districts, and then the YMCA down 250, a couple miles to the south, is in the Webster School District.
So, road.
So what are you gonna do with all the traffic? You're at, what'd you say, 150 houses?
They're currently proposed 72 right now. So on 1 acre zoning, they're proposed 72 houses. Jim was just extrapolating, saying if you want half acre zoning, so half of that, you would
Twice.
double, so 140 new homes just for basic math on.
The other side of that is you can look at just to the west of that, and you can see how the parcels have been broken up to larger lots. So it's kind of a different situation here than it was where Bill is, because these have already been parceled out, and many of these lots have deed restrictions on them against future subdivisions.
I was still wondering what you're gonna do with all that traffic, so.
Put it on the roads versus driving through people's yards.
Not really an answer, there, is it?
Plank and Jackson are already rural arterials that lead to other major arterial roads.
If you've driven down Plank and in the morning and the afternoon, it's pretty busy.
I drive Plank almost every day to work in the morning. Jackson.
I mean, this is the balance we're running into. I mean, you've got farmers here that are looking to sell their land, and that's their retirement, and they're looking, that's what they're looking to do to, get their value back out of their property versus, weighing other impacts to the public under traffic and environmental impacts and everything else. That's why this isn't easy stuff, and that's why we spent a year getting to this point where we are now and coming to talk about these properties. It's not obviously a simple answer, but obviously, as we've talked about many times, every property is developable. So just to say we're going to do nothing, it can still be developed as 2 acre, it can still be developed as 1 acre. So just do nothing is not going to stop, more development or more people moving into town.
No, and if they put sanitary sewers in, they're still gonna build 72 houses, but they're gonna look like a tract house. It's gonna be a subdivision, not these rural estate type houses on 1 acre each. They won't be that.
So,
There will be land left over that's gonna remain vacant and remain part of the subdivision that won't be developed, but they will not be on large estate lots like you see in the old ones here.
Is there a federal wetland on that parcel in the north too?
There is.
it kind of cuts along that, there's a little creek that runs through there. And a little bisect that kind of runs north.
So
And
keep in
that's-
mind, everybody, that cuts down a buildable area.
Yeah.
What do you think about density?
And that's exactly right, and that was taken into consideration as the 72 units were devised for this site. They actually came in with higher density, and we scaled it back because they didn't take into account some of this, so.
So the property itself is 72 acres?
With the wetlands identified as Roland's
Yeah.
shown.
I think it's
Right.
79.
70 or 80 acres overall, so by the
But they're
time you
not
take
allowed
out
to
the
use all of it.
wetlands, then
Right, they have to take the
33.
wetland out. 33 and 57.
so you're at 100 acres, 90 acres.
Okay,
So 90 acres, so by the time you take out the wetlands and you take out areas for the driveways and the roads,
Comes down to
it's not a
70.
straight, it's a little bit less than what that allows.
So remember, we talked about the idea of preparing a conventional plan, a conventional layout, how you would have to lay it out under 1 acre development. Then after that, they then can crunch it into the cluster development, but they don't get any higher density than what the conventional plan calls for.
Let's go back to the first one now, we kind of talked about this one, let's go back to the Welch's Market. Say we kind of had 2 proposals, we've had a 1 acre and then a R112. Anybody in either camp or somewhere in the middle?
Can we zoom out a little bit more?
So, see, you've got Falvo Funeral Home here. You've kind of got a farm south of that, then you kind of get into some more wetlands. Dark wooded areas, kind of state and federal wetlands there. That's the back of RG&E's property here. But on Plank Road, they've got the tower up, and then kind of that's one of their east side spots there. And then you kind of get into the LB over here, which was the Harris Corp. Just to kind of
Can you put the wetlands map back up for
finish
that
off.
region?
Light blue, dark blue is state wetlands with a 100-foot buffer around the outside of it is the dark blue, and then the yellowy orange is federal wetlands. Major differences.
No buffer.
No buffer, and then state wetlands don't go below, anything below 12 acres. So that's why they're still showing wetlands, and those are smaller pockets. Would still show up as federal wetlands. Doesn't have a buffer around it. It has to be at least 12 acres in size in order for the state to make it identified as a state wetland. And then they've got that darker blue 100-foot buffer around there. And again, we don't have to decide tonight, you know, this is something to talk about. If the group's, the majority is supportive of one way or the other, we can take that into consideration
If
and
we go
start
back out
down
and
that
look at
path.
it again, we could do that as well.
We can take a look at it, we can send you some mapping, review it. Is there somewhere between 1 acre and R112, half acre zoning?
Go for the higher densities to the north.
So you're supportive of matching the R112?
Yeah. Because it is under restriction anyways with a wetland to the south and west.
Now, would you kind of just this parcel, or would you look at,
Just that one. For now.
They haven't asked.
I'm just asking the questions we're looking at, at least we can say we had the conversation and
I think just for that for now, because it has sewers
directly
More
abutting and sewers and.
more accessible to it than conjecture.
That's a good point, Roland, because I'm not even sure the grades are there for them to pick up a sanitary sewer without a pump station. And they might not
Well,
have
that's
enough
why I
density.
asked earlier if it
That's
was
right. They might not have enough
accessible by
density to
gravity.
warrant a pump station there.
It's a little bit of a hill where those trees sit, but it's 490. Yeah, it's pretty
It's flat over there.
flat, 490, okay.
Yeah, there's no contour from one end to the other.
So we got 2 recommendations for R112 on this. Anybody else? No? Okay. No, Chris, you're yes?
Yeah, I'll do, yeah.
So we got 3, Charles? No, so we got 3, 3. Is there anything in between? So we got 3 S's for R112. I don't know if everybody else is for R1. Donna had a 1 acre zoning. Between R112 and that is either R115 or R120. Is anybody at half acre zoning, does that change anybody's mind?
The only thing is, with the half acre zoning, it gets 24 units.
You're not paying the incentive zoning fee.
Without paying the incentive zoning fee, it's 27 units with the incentive zoning fee.
But it makes the land more viable or valuable if you're not paying
Oh,
the
absolutely.
incentive fee plus
It's
buying the
probably
property.
worth not paying the 3 extra units.
You'll
Or
end
getting
up,
3 extra
you'll end
units.
up getting the same similar layout without, you know, having to pay the incentive rate. So if you're at half acre zoning, does that change anybody else's mind? No? Charles?
So just so that you know, the rationale for giving him incentive zoning was that they didn't want to see like one lot, one of the proposed lots, abutting 2 lots behind it, where you had 2 neighbors behind you with an R120 versus the R112 or whatever it really comes out to be. That was the rationale for doing that, so that it kind of matched up with what was up there in the front. But that was incentive zoning, that was not just straight standard zoning. You would
What's
probably
the
prefer
cost
not
for-
to have incentive zoning if you could have it, right?
Pardon me?
You'd prefer not to have incentive zoning if you could do that.
Yeah.
What's the cost for the incentive zoning?
It's a number negotiated with the town board, so there's not a.
Yeah,
there's
it's not a fast number, it depends on a whole bunch of things, but the money ends up going to public works improvements, whether it be drainage or sidewalks or whatever the case may be. It really depends on the
Any idea what
density.
the range would cost would be? Or?
We did have, back in the day, we did have
Somewhere I'd
members,
say you're in the $5,000
5 to 9,000 in some cases.
Who's 6?
per lot.
A lot.
Per lot, yeah, not overall, that's.
I think
That's a per lot
that the
fee.
project to the north was about $9,900 a lot, something like that.
Above what zoning
It's normal,
allows.
yeah.
So it's not, so if,
So if you're allowed 50
So-
lots and you want 65, you're paying for the 15 extra, not the 65.
yeah, so if this is 17 acres, if at 2 acre zoning, you could get, 8 homes, 9 homes out of it, now you're going to 27, you're doing the net difference, so you're paying for 18, 19 additional lots, you're paying 5 or 6,
Right.
$10,000 additional. It's basically decreasing your density, and then that money goes into repairing a culvert nearby, or the town board's used it for other stuff, some betterments to the neighborhood. Well, let's back off again. Is the group supportive of at least 1 acre? I mean, that would double the density of what it is now. If he's still going to a development similar to what's to the north, you'd still be in an incentive zoning thing, but he'd at least be half of what he's currently got.
I guess my thought, and where I'm coming from, is if you give bigger lots, you're gonna get bigger houses, you're gonna get families, you're not gonna get senior housing. And if we're talking about putting another big track right up the street from it, you spoke about diversity, you know what you're getting, to the southwest, you're gonna get another Ryan track, you're gonna get another big development. If
That's
you put the
exactly
same
what's
thing,
interesting in the site, you're right.
Not this one, the
No,
one
the 72 lots.
Jackson and Plank.
right. So if the goal is diversity, we know what we're getting down the way. Let's continue addressing some senior housing and put it there, rather than just put another half-acre lots or acre lots and 2,500 square foot family homes, when that's exactly what you're gonna get right up the street. That's where I'm coming, that's in my mind, that's why I'm more supportive
That's okay.
of the patio home.
Welcome to the input. Anybody else?
I think right now we're split 3-3 on this one, so we'll carry it over to the next meeting and get more input from the rest of the committee members.
Is there like a tug of war rope in the closet?
Wrestle it out.
Remember, we said that everybody's opinion matters, and
As I say, well,
as long as we're civil, that's all that matters.
so,
All right, so we'll hold off on this one, and give you a chance maybe to drive around and look at the neighborhood and see what you think, and we'll go from
sort
there.
of take a look. In the meantime, if you want some mapping to look at or other stuff, as part of while you're taking a look at it, let us know. We can provide the zoning maps, we can provide, obviously, the school district, boundaries and other stuff, if that helps to formalize your thoughts or your decisions on it. We want to just close this out. Let's go over to, now this one is 1 acre versus the 2 acre zoning. Thoughts on this one of changing it from 1 acre zoning? See, to Roland's point, currently doesn't have direct access to sanitary sewer. As the other one did, but they're looking at doing low-pressure pumps over to Shoecraft Road. So this one is currently pending before the planning board right now. They're
I thought the
looking
town
at
wasn't looking very favorably at those low-pressure sewers.
It's on the town board agenda tomorrow night, so we'll have a discussion with the town board and see what the town board's thought is on it. The town board expressed that they did not want to own and maintain the pumps. There's been some recent, we have them in other locations, but there's been some recent issuances by the DEC that they say basically if you have low-pressure sewers, we've owned and maintained the main before. They've come out with some new determination from both the county health department and the DEC saying that the town or whatever entity needs to own and maintain the individual pumps at each house. Our town board says they're not interested in doing that. The DEC came back and said they will allow it under an HOA or a sewer transportation district. So I'll be back sitting at this table tomorrow night with the town board to bring that back to them and see what the town board's thoughts is, if it's not owned by the town and maintained by the town, but if it's an HOA in charge and the HOA owns it, maintains it, through a sewer transportation district, is the town board comfortable with that as well? So tomorrow night we'll hear what the town board's thoughts are on that and whether they want to move forward with those or not.
How much would something like that add to our HOA fee?
They're fairly reliable pumps. I mean, the initial cost is the cost of the developer, so you're about $500 to $7,500 for a setup, for a system. Get it set up, you'd set it out by the road, and there are companies that do the maintenance of it, so you'd have to enter into a contract with them to operate it. Basically, the DEC, their concern is if it's not maintained properly and it fails for whatever reason, now you've got sewage that's flowing out of the system into a creek or into something nearby. So they want some entity responsible, so within 24 hours of the light going off, you got a red light on it that says that, either the power's out, something's wrong with the system. Within 24 hours, you've got enough of a storage tank in there, so if the power's out, obviously you're not running the laundry, you're not running high water usage things, but you can still flush the toilet. You can still run water into a sink. They have enough of a storage tank that if you use moderate usage, you can hold enough capacity for 24 hours. Somebody come out, pull out the pump, you put a new pump in, they're pretty plug and play. Put a new pump in, you're back in operation. So the HOA would have to enter into a contract with a local company that has these units. They have them on stock. They have to guarantee they have a 24-hour response time that they could come out, pull the pump out, put the new pump back in. They take the old pumps away. They're usually, it's a matter of taking them apart, fixing whatever part that's broken. They put it back on their shelf, and then when Jim's pump goes down, he may get the rehabbed one, and that would go back into his. So they kind of cycle them around. And
but going back to your
Is there
question,
any requirement forcing to have emergency backup power?
it's not by the DEC, but that's one thing that the town board is talking about as well, is that may weigh into it, that in this development, is a Ryan Home development, they've talked about providing generators for each house. If that was part of it, that they would have maybe not a whole house generator, but at least a generator there enough that could power the unit in the front. That's some of the stuff that our sewer department has concerns about, as well as the town board. If the power, we got another ice storm, we're down for a week or 2 weeks or whatever that time frame is, our sewer crews are running around to the regional pump stations trying to keep those up and running. We have requirements now that all new pump stations have backup generators for them, gas powered, natural gas powered, so they just run on their own. But do they need to be spending their time running around to 72 houses, plugging a generator into each pump and pumping it down? So that's some of the stuff the town board's looking at, is if it comes with a generator with each house, it's under an HOA, it's under the sewer transportation district, is that enough that the town board is comfortable to move ahead on that? So if you tune in tomorrow night at 7 o'clock.
well, maybe that's a good reason
It's
not
a bad
to
time.
discuss this until they know where the town board is.
Yeah,
I'm just laying out the facts of where it is, and I'm
Yeah,
not
yeah.
putting where we are, opinion, whatever. This is just the information that's come ahead of us. So this is, currently pending, and it's very timely that, this is pending before the town board, and the town board, will have further discussions about this.
we want to hold on to this one.
Yep.
Do we know that so you said it's Ryan Homes that was interested in the 72,
They have a
Houses on-
contract. Yes.
These two
They have the
lots here,
purchase offer
yes.
on it.
okay,
The only reason we know is just they have an application currently before the planning board.
gotcha. Do
It's
you-
public information, that's why we shared who was looking at this one.
Any sense of what the sort of size and price range of the sorts of houses they're thinking of are?
Oh, Ryan's
think
houses
it's
are all
certainly-
over 300,000.
Yeah,
They're all over
350.
300,000.
I think Windsor Ridge is kind of the template, this one at 5 Mile Atlantic. I think those have started at 300 and went up from there depending on size and.
There's
what's
one
included in
on
those.
Tuscany Lane too, they finished up Tuscany Lane in that area up there, just beyond Mary View.
Yeah, the back half of Camden Park
Yeah,
is
that's all Ryan.
Ryan Homes. Okay.
Well, it's getting close to the
Let's see.
witching hour, and we're not gonna hold you up any longer. We have a second set of properties that we're gonna look at, but just to recap what those are, just so they have a feel for it, it's probably the easier of the 2 pages. The Allen Street Valley Townhouse project is, for some reason, when it was built in the zone multi-residential, which allowed it to be built at that time, it's probably gonna be easier for them to be zone townhouse, as it is a townhouse project. The same is true across the street at Sable Oaks. There's a 14-lot townhouse project there, which is zone MR, probably should be zone TH. It's probably better for financing and everything else if they do it. The next one on the list was that little house that we talked about on Empire Boulevard next to the old farm market. We kind of talked about that one and got it where it needed to be, so that's kind of done. And then the ones that we want to look at that are going to wrestle with a little bit are that properties along Plank Road between Empire and Creek Street. We talked about that when we were out. The property just north of the Gymnastics Training Center on Route 250, and then some of the houses beyond that. And then finally, the Glendevere's Party House on Old Browncroft Boulevard. We talked about that very briefly, and we'll get into a discussion on that the next time.
So that one's a pre-existing non-conforming use as a party house restaurant,
It's in
kind
a
of a
residential
single-family
zoning
residential
district.
area, so like part of the discussion on that is you rezone it to something residential, MR townhouse or something,
To encourage them to tear down or refurbish what's there.
redevelop
into a
and
residential
come back with
setting
something more
instead of
residential,
commercial.
keeping with the neighborhood. But
There's not a lot of land to play with there. If you could just really quickly,
It's really wet.
yeah, turn the wetlands on,
Yeah.
you're limited to what it, what it could be or what it could grow to.
Take it, it's not on sewer either.
it is actually.
It is, we have a trunk line that comes down Old Browncroft, so they're,
Okay.
They had a lot of problems over the years, and finally the county forced them on them sanitary sewer.
Okay.
That was done many years ago.
yeah, we've got an inverted siphon that goes under the creek, and then it goes over, the interceptor is right next to Baker Commodities, is the county interceptor. It's the purple line we tie into there, so it was a fairly recent project from Old Browncroft.
15.
They came down and then comes past there, and then coming through, they tied into that line, so it was good to get them off of a septic system, in the wetland.
Well, we're in that neighborhood. Could you show us the daycare center that you talked about?
Yes.
Another time, and just,
Maybe that's another one we should talk about too. We didn't really get a chance to
yeah, because that,
do that.
I've heard people that I know who live in that neighborhood talking about that and wondering what's going on.
Yeah, I was kind of hoping that George was here tonight to talk about
That's his
that.
neighborhood.
So you've got, actually, I think he's a neighbor.
He is.
Yeah, well, he's up.
Oh,
He lives on
he's-
Parkview.
He's up the
here on
street a little
Friday.
ways,
Yeah.
but he's a neighbor.
So you've got this property that was for many, many years from 1960 on, was
So
used as a daycare
So we'll
facility.
just zoom out first, everybody know where we are, or
This is Old Browncroft
So,
Boulevard and
right at the
Wake.
top of Browncroft, and then that first turn in turns into Old Browncroft, White Village, and then once you come back in.
So it was a
that's
small
kinda-
world nursery with Miss Rita, if anybody remembers Miss Rita. So that predated our ordinances, so it was built as a single family many, many years ago, I think around 1900. Around 1960, which is 2 years prior to our first full ordinance, they converted it to a daycare center, which is kind of surprising to me actually that they did it, but they did. You got parking facilities there, you've got playground facilities, you've got a big house that has got a lot of issues associated with things that need to be remediated. The property right now it does have an owner, but the problem is that there is a company, and I believe it's Propel out in New Jersey, that has put a lien, they paid the taxes on it and put a lien on it. So that's one more constraint. We have actually talked to a couple of developers to see if they'd be willing to tear down the house and then develop a couple of new houses on the site. And they're looking into the feasibility of doing that, but it's a tough site. And it's on a curve there, which is a busy area because it services the entire neighborhood. That's the only means of ingress and egress out of that entire neighborhood. If you could come out, this is why this doesn't happen anymore, all the way. Oops. So it picks up all of Parkview Drive. It goes all the way back to Old Westfall Road. There's only one point of ingress and egress for that entire neighborhood. And we've
Okay.
had trees fall down that have
Miles of
taken
road that go
people
back off of one
hours
access
to get out.
point.
Was there, years ago, there was talk of extending.
Yes,
the
as a matter of
past
fact,
years? Was they gonna,
there was a gentleman who's interested in building 33 townhouses on his site. I don't know if that's still gonna happen or not. Me particularly requested that they allow an emergency access point down to Empire
well,
Boulevard.
they were, what I'm talking about was they did an intersection, I thought it was an intersection study of that intersection of Blossom and Brown Path. And they looked at, one of the possibilities was putting a stop sign in and extending that road that goes, the old road that goes from Glendevere's up into that track.
They did, it really, that road was the main road before Browncroft Boulevard was
Right.
constructed. I talked to some of the old highway guys that were here back in the day, and even when they were plowing, they'd be going down that road sideways. It was kind of bad. I don't anticipate that road will be open again anytime soon. What they were talking about, the possibility of doing in the study that I think you're referring to, if you could pull it further to the east, they were looking at, as these properties here that are currently residential get changed over due to high traffic generation, which at some point it may happen, that they would construct that road, Old Browncroft Boulevard, continue behind those properties and create a parallel road to Browncroft to get back out to Creek Street so that you weren't on Browncroft Boulevard trying to get in and out all the time.
Right.
So
Kind of like what they
you
did at
connect
Mott's
all the-
Lane down in the Four Corners. And that would occur as development started to change along Browncroft.
Is the daycare center just, it's a non-conforming use in a,
It's not a non-conforming use because daycare centers are permitted activities within residential zoning districts.
okay.
It's probably pre-existing non-conforming in the sense that it doesn't have the acreage.
Size of the building and.
Right, the size of the
everything
building
else
is larger than what a normal daycare center would be now, and your acreage is not as big as it should be. But it is a permitted activity within a residential zone. I don't know why the daycare didn't survive. It might have been the fact that it's hard to get in and out of in the morning on your way downtown. You don't want to make that turn to get back out. I don't know. It was very viable for a long, long time, but it certainly didn't last. I've had developers look at it for the possibility of creating multiple residential units in there, as many as up to 6 or 8 units. To even have a mixed use where you'd have an office in there and then the rest of it would be multi-residential. I guess, I don't know, I'd like to hear from some of the neighbors to see what they
Hard sell
prefer.
with the neighbors there, I would think.
Right, right.
If it's all residential.
It'd be interesting to hear what the neighbors would think about various options. Nobody's come to me yet and said they're gonna buy it or have any interest in buying it. They're just looking at their options at this point in time. We'll spend some more time on that next time. So, before I let you go, and I'm gonna let you go in a second, we did talk about next steps. Once we kind of get through this and you're comfortable with recommendations that you want to make, I think our intent is to start rewriting the document, to put it to a level that you're comfortable with, giving you sections to look at and critique and edit as you see fit, getting those edits back to us and letting us create section by section for you, and then put together a package that we can give to the town board sometime in the first quarter of next year. We would like to get this done. There's still a lot of things, even after you get done with this document, the town board has to review it and determine that it's supportive of what you've prepared or not. And then once they come to a final product that they like, it could be the exact same document, it could be a little bit different. We would still have to go through the state environmental quality review process, which takes an inordinate amount of time because it's a type 1 action. We will have to do an environmental impact statement for the project. So even that would take us in probably to the second quarter of next year. So we want to get something to you as quickly as possible so you can start reviewing these documents to fashion them to your image and likeness.
So at this point, we're proposing to take December off, just knowing December gets busy. We'll be obviously working on stuff in the background and writing and getting stuff prepared, and then that's why we said didn't have a date, but then in early January, setting our next meeting, and then hopefully having some documentation for you guys ahead of that to start looking at. We can obviously continue our conversations about the zoning of itself, stuff with that, but
So we're going to meet in 2 weeks from tonight?
no, we're not meeting until January.
Well, it'd be nice to get this done.
I mean, we can schedule
I think
to
if I could
finish
get these
these.
comments in so that you're done with it, so that we can start actually preparing some things for you.
Okay.
So with everybody's permission,
That's the
maybe,
week of Thanksgiving, isn't it?
Yeah, so we'll be in
or
early
maybe we go into the first week of December.
December. Okay.
Yeah, that'd be better.
Let's knock it off and get you guys squared away so we can start the actual writing process.
Yeah, I don't wanna drag this out.
December 3rd, I already had
Yeah, I
a
showed
meeting
me
on there.
for that.
December
Pardon?
3rd.
December 3rd, we already, it's on.
Yeah, I think we
Okay.
did, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So let's hold that night.
We'll renew that.
Maybe we can get this stuff knocked off early and we'll let you go early. We're not gonna throw more at you, we'll try and get these things done. So in the meantime, if you've got questions or issues or concerns that you want to go out and take a look at the property, see what you think. If you have any questions or you need anything from us, don't hesitate to ask. Thank you all very much. Appreciate your efforts.